One of the things I like about the chanting is that as soon as we start, there's always more space in the hall. And you can feel some of the aversion in the air. Why are we doing this religious practice? I thought we were just going to sit. I tried to suggest, look at your mind. Don't look at the chant. Look at your mind during the chant and see what happens. It's like any other activity. It's an opportunity to notice the conditioning that we live by and that holds us very tightly in its grasp, so that we forget that we are the ones holding the conditioning. The conditioning isn't necessarily holding us. And the nature of the mind is to forget that and to associate very closely with the conditioning so that you call it yourself. I don't like this. Like, this doesn't work for me. No, it's the way I am. I know myself. And I know this doesn't work. And I know this works. And our rituals are pretty mild here. If you go to a more traditional center, if you're interested someday, and find that, I thought this was a meditation center. Why are they doing all of this stuff? And chanting rituals, work practice, all sorts of things, very strict schedule. What do you need all that form for? Well, if you take away the form, what do you have? I mean, you have your everyday. And how mindful are we every day? You know, can we trust ourselves? Yeah, you can trust your mind, but can you trust your thinking mind? You can trust your aware mind, that's for sure. You know, the mind that knows. But the mind that thinks, the self, can you trust that? So, without some of the supports, the mind tends to just, run on its favorite paths that are deeply, walked on. Because they're easy. It's a path of least resistance, because it's been walked on frequently. And those are all your likes and dislikes. Those are the attachments and aversions. The delusion, which is in the center of this problem, what the Buddha pointed out of these three poisons of attachment, aversion, and delusion, is that we identify with the attachment and aversions as who I am. That's the delusion. It's really simple. It's not just that you have a strong like and dislike. It's that you take that as defining yourself, representing who you are, rather than just a conditioned pattern that you've been reinforcing over a lifetime. That could have gone another way, given another culture, given another circumstance. That very path would have been very different. And your likes and dislikes would have been totally different. If you're born in another country, born with another skin color, born with another, diet in your daily life, your likes and dislikes, your pathways, well-worn sense of self would be very different. And yet, we see it as essential and defining us. And right. So this is an opportunity to study the Buddha way, is to study the self. As Dogen said in his, Genjo Koan, and to study the self is to forget the self. That just means when you look at this conditioning happening, you start to forget that it's you, and you just see the conditioning. Instead of thinking and identifying with I like and I don't like, you just notice that there's likes and dislikes going on. And that there are attachments and aversions. There are things during meditation when you look at and you say, yeah, it's like there's aversion, there's attachment, I want more, I want less. And you see this like this game that the self is playing over and over again. It comes down to noticing the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is the experience that is inevitable, inescapable, and moment by moment happening as you breathe. Right? There's physical pain, there's mental pain, there's emotional pain. There's all types of pain going on. When that morphs and distorts, and I use the word carefully, distort, because the distortion is when we magnify the pain through the lens of the self. When I personally identify with it, then it morphs and it changes shape and color. It becomes exaggerated into something we call suffering. Suffering is pain that has been personalized. It's personal pain. That's what suffering is. When I take it personally, then it becomes something either I am succeeding or failing with, and my sense of self is born out of that. Can we observe the pain real time as it happens? And that pain is the pain of aversion and attachment. Think it real simple. Very simply in your meditation. You experience physical pain, okay? Or you experience some mental pain, like a recurring thought, some obsessive thought, revisiting an argument, judgment of what's going on. That all makes you feel uncomfortable, right? And you kind of want to get out of the situation. Very ordinary experience of pain. Very common experience of pain. How about just pain when you sit too long? Like, how many of you sit an hour a day? You just sat an hour. Most of us, given an hour, start to experience some physical pain. Very natural. Inescapable, unavoidable, guaranteed. Okay? That's meditation. You're going to experience pain. If you got nothing going on in your mind, you will experience physical pain. So be it. That's what's going to happen. Okay, I promise. You saw it tonight. Almost simultaneously, but a moment later. It seems to arise at the same moment as the pain, but there really is a gap. And the interesting investigation in meditation is to notice that gap between when suddenly you have something physical or even mental and emotional arising that is uncomfortable, to when it turns into self. And I don't like it and I want it to go away. Instead of noticing it and you pause for a moment to actually explore what it's like, and you see your aversion arising, it immediately becomes an emergency, right? It's a serious problem. The problem isn't that pain happens, because that's unavoidable. How can we observe it with a bit more what's called equanimity? And here, equanimity does not mean that suddenly the pain has become manageable. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just really still very difficult. And when you accept it, if equanimity does mean acceptance, it doesn't mean that now I'm, coming to terms with the pain, or maybe I even kind of like it. No, it's not about liking. It's not about disliking. It's noticing that identifying with it as a personal aspect of yourself, selfing the experience, is extra. That is another step. We can step back from the constant compulsion to always personalize our experience. It's not all about you. You can have difficulties in your body and mind, but the aware mind is free of those difficulties. The mind that can be aware of that difficulty, just in the same way you can be aware of a breath and be aware of a breath. And there isn't an awareness saying, I like the breath, I don't like the breath. That same awareness of just starting with the breath, you can bring into looking at any experience you're having. And this is why we base our meditation on something as sort of neutral as the breath. Because there's not much to be attached with the breath, and there's not much to have an aversion with the breath. It's just pretty simple. Take that simple awareness and expand it, open it, so that it can include more. Now, initially, you're not going to open it wide open to include all the difficulties. Because that's like going from running 100 meters to running marathon. No. You're going to start to go from 100 meters of like staying with my breath to being able to open that equanimity, that awareness, to maybe include a little more difficulty. Like, yeah, my ankle's hurting now. Okay, pain in the ankle. I don't need to go into emergency mode. I can step back from panic and just observe that and observe my aversion to it. And not think of myself, judge not my experience and my sense of self by virtue of me having a hard time with this pain. No? It's just part and parcel of being alive. This is the first noble truth, which is called the truth of suffering, the truth of dukkha. Pain, it's not that it's necessary. It's simply like the air we breathe. It's there. It's just there. Sometimes we see it, sometimes we don't. Sometimes the air blows, sometimes it's hot, and sometimes it's cold. But there's always air. There's always difficulty and suffering. It's just part of being here in this world. It doesn't have to be a comment on you. Your body will hurt. So be it. Your mind will tighten and get upset. So be it. You'll feel sadness. You'll feel joy. Thus too. It's just going to happen. But the Buddha did not teach about suffering by itself. Suffering is understood in the whole teaching of the Dharma. And this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about the middle way. Nagarjuna, the Indian sort of Buddhist philosopher who started a university in Europa. This is in the year 200. He said that everything exists, that's one extreme. Nothing exists, that's another extreme. Avoiding these two extremes, the Buddha taught the middle way. That still doesn't help me. Right? So here's what the Buddha said. Monks, these two extremes should not be practiced by one who has gone forth. What are these two? There is addiction to sense pleasures, which is low and coarse in the way of ordinary people. It's untrustworthy and unprofitable. Okay, it's nice, it's like untrustworthy. You cannot trust our addiction to sense pleasures. And don't tell me you're not addicted to sense pleasures. Okay, we all are. And it doesn't mean that you're like a drug addict. It just means I crave comfort and I reject discomfort. It's simple as that. Like, I'm addicted to feeling comfortable. I want to feel comfortable in my life. And I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I want to feel pleasure, and I don't want to feel pain. Can anyone say that's not true of them? You know? It's just the way we are. And there's an addiction to self-mortification, which is painful, untrustworthy, and unprofitable. Self-mortification means like I'm, denying myself any comfort. Like I'm above comfort. I don't need that. Okay? So there's these two things of like attachment and aversion. Avoiding these extremes, the Tathagata, that's the way the Buddha is called, the thus come one, has realized the middle path. It gives vision, gives knowledge, and leads to calm, to insight and enlightenment, and to nirvana. And what is the middle path realized by the Tathagata? It is the Noble Eightfold Path and nothing else. Namely, right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. The middle way. This is really wonderful what the Buddha is teaching. We think of the middle way as in between, the midpoint between extremes. Like if I have some aversion and I really want sense pleasures, and I have, attachment, I really want sense pleasures, An aversion, like I just want to be without anything. These two extremes. The middle way isn't saying, okay, between having like cake and having bread, I'll have a salad. That's not the middle way. Okay, the middle way is not between these two extremes of self-indulgence and self-denial. So like you have like a kind of self, it's still self that way, the middle way. How do we step out of that system of, two extremes? It's a way of life. That's what the Noble Eightfold Path is. It's a way of life. It's finding how to be of benefit and not cause harm in our speech, in our activities, right speech, right action, right livelihood is work, okay? Right effort, meaning the efforts we make with our energy, right concentration, right mindfulness, right intention, right understanding or wisdom. The Eightfold Path is the middle way. It's not the way in between extremes. It's the way of stepping out of extremes. All extremes are going to lead to harm, right? Whether it's extreme indulgence or extreme self-denial, all of it is going to lead to harm. So I want to share a couple of koans that, in the Zen tradition, they try to express this by that move of stepping out of it. How do you step out of this? Which does not mean escape. So, there's one koan where Goso, one of the Zen ancestors, he said, when you meet a man on the way, don't greet him with words and don't greet him with silence. How will you greet him? So it's basically asking the question, how do I find the middle way? If I can't, I shouldn't be addicted to sense pleasures, and yet I shouldn't deny my senses. What do I do? Where's the middle way here? If I meet someone, what do I say that's going to be right speech? Without falling into the extreme of saying no, I'm just going to be silent and avoid the problem. There's no avoiding the problem, right? The problem is the practice. Muman says, the commentator, there's no answer to this, by the way, but Muman says, if you can answer Goso exactly, that's extremely good. But if you cannot answer properly yet, then you must do your best to watch everything. That's the answer. How do I find the middle way? You must do your best to watch everything. That's the mindfulness practice. It's not about finding the answer that you can then express in words. This is the answer. Are you able to really pay attention? This is what it's all about. Can you pay attention to what's happening, not to you happening? As soon as the attention turns to what you are doing with it, it turns the pain into suffering. If you can just pay attention closely, look closely, watch what's happening, it's no longer about you. It's that inquisitiveness, it's that interest, it's that investigation into what it means to be here. What does it mean to walk on stones? What does it mean to turn on the tap and feel water? What does it mean to be hungry, to be tired, to be cold, to have a pain in your head or in your back? What does that mean? Can you watch closely without it suddenly being a judgment about how you are? What if it's not all about you? Even the pain you're experiencing, what if that's also not about you? This is an experiment. It's not over. You're still running the methods. You're still examining the results. Moment by moment. Are you watching carefully what your mind does, what your body does, what it's like to breathe, and what it's like to judge? Do you notice that happening? Here's another koan that was given the same name, Silence and Words. A monk asked Fuketsu, without words or without silence. Okay, and we can think of words as like the one extreme and silence is the other extreme, okay? Words is expressing that sense of everything exists that Nagarjuna said, and silence is nothing exists. So without falling into two extremes, okay, without words or without silence, how can one be unmistakably at peace with the universe? It's quite a question, isn't it? How can you find true peace without using words and without silence? No? How can you find true peace? Because isn't that what we want? We want to be really at home in the universe. Like we want to feel at home. Okay? You want to be who you are and feel it. Complete comfort with that. Fuketsu said to this monk who asked him, without words or without silence, how can I be at complete peace in the universe? He said, I often think of March in southern China. The birds sing among the hundreds of fragrant flowers. That was it. I often think of March in southern China. The birds sing among the hundreds of fragrant flowers. It wasn't a philosophical answer. Simply, I remember that time when I was really paying attention. When I was really observing, I felt at home in the universe. When I was really paying attention, I didn't feel like there was anything missing. When I started to get distracted and think about what was good for me and what wasn't good for me, I lost it. I lost it. So one definition of anxiety, which Charlotte Chocobec gave, was anxiety is the gap between how things are and how you think they ought to be. That's her definition of anxiety. That sense of dis-ease. Dukkha, in a certain translation, is not translated as suffering, but rather as dis-ease. That sense of, like, there's something missing here. I'm uncomfortable. I don't know how to get comfortable in my seat. Meditation, in your car, on your travels, at work, at study. There's always something wrong. And what we're paying attention to is one side of the equation. It's the Nagarjuna's, dichotomy. We're not looking at what exists, we're looking at what doesn't exist. We're not focused on the words, we're focused on the silence. We're still splitting the world into one or the other. So when that gap, which comes up as an uncomfortable feeling, what we're paying attention to is the lack. What's missing in this environment? That's being attached to emptiness, as we say in Zen, being attached to the silence. What's missing in here? When we get attached to things, we're really holding on to what is, to the words. The middle way is stepping back from both the words and the silence. Leaving that gap, that once you're involved in that equation, there's always going to be a gap between what is and what ought to be. Always going to be that. Here's what Dogen said, and how Master Dogen, when he came back from China, In the 13th century, Dogen left Japan for China for 3 years. He tried to find some type of truth that he couldn't find in Japan. And he was asked, what did you bring back from China? What did you bring back with you to Japan? Meaning what wisdom, what truth, what realization? He said, I came back empty-handed. Okay, what did you learn? He was asked. Not much, except gentle-heartedness. That's actually a lot, isn't it? Right. And he added, I learned that eyes are horizontal and nose is vertical. This is Master Dogen, okay? Again, he's not trying to be funny. It sounds funny. He's actually just saying, what I see is what there is. You know, that's it. I'm not going to make it into something it's not. I'm going to see you for what you are. You know, I'm not going to project all of my hopes and all my disappointments onto you. And that's what the gentle-heartedness is. The gentle-heartedness means that I'm just going to see you for what you are. Horizontal eyes, vertical nose. Like, that's it. Now, I don't need to go into all of my story. I don't even need to go into your story, because how is that going to help in this moment right now? If I want to be gentle and full of heart, it's just paying attention and watching right now, this moment. Thinking of those birds in the trees. So I'll finish with a quote from Ajahn Chah. All the teachers that I've encountered are saying versions of the same thing. That being present is an act of love. That if you really want to care, it's really paying attention. And this is how Ajahn Chah expressed it. This is how I understand him, describing the middle way, which again is stepping back from that duality. Stepping back from the sense of there is and there isn't. That there's this world and there's so much missing. And I feel pulled between them. And that tension between what's missing and what is usually makes me miserable. There's always going to be something missing when your mind is in that space. Whether it's in this meditation, whether it's in this room, whether it's in your house, whether it's in your bed, there's going to be something missing. And you'll be pulled taut. If you let go of that, the tension suddenly dissolves. And here's how Ajahn Chah expressed it in the way. Do not try to become anything. Ajahn Chah was the Thai master in the 20th century. Do not try to become anything. Do not make yourself into anything. Do not be a meditator. Do not become enlightened. When you sit, let it be. When you walk, let it be. Grasp at nothing. Resist nothing. And if you haven't wept deeply, you haven't begun to meditate. That's the essence of it. If you haven't wept deeply, you haven't begun to meditate. If it doesn't make you, feel compassionate, caring, and grief even. Sympathetic joy, when we look at compassion, it's sympathetic grief. If you haven't wept deeply, you haven't begun to meditate. Meditation is not avoiding the difficulty. It's accepting it as the path. And we walk it together. Comments about our sitting and meditation practice that we do here, and that you do yourself. It's always good to perhaps comment or ask.
How about expressing ourselves like using body language? Is that possible? Instead of, talking or listening or silence or whatever, just express yourself by just using body language, like smile or, etc. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's all about intention.
Right.
If the right intention is there. When I read about how the Buddha defined the middle way, not as the midpoint between extremes, but as the Eightfold Path, these like 8 steps. One of those paths is called right speech. And right speech could just mean like let's say right communication. Okay, right communication. And what makes it right? People always ask, well, right versus wrong. I mean, that sounds very like dualistic. Here it's not right versus wrong. It's more, is it going to help or going to harm? So if the expression is a naturally communicating your care, then that's how we live. So yeah, I mean, we're wanting to work on that gentle-heartedness, and then every expression will kind of convey that.
Counting the breath, is that, I sometimes count the breaths. It's almost like an attack. It feels sometimes like an attack. I think it makes things easier sometimes, counting, but I'm worried that perhaps it's attaching, it's a continuation. It's much easier to go from 1 to 20 than just breathing without any beginning and no end. I know that 15 breaths is 1 minute, and sometimes I maybe get attached to that. Don't know what you can say about that.
Yeah, if you're breathing slower or faster, it might be a problem.
No, my uncontrolled breathing is 15.
20.
Uncontrolled breathing, 15 a minute, and then I know if I get to 150 at 10 minutes.
Somebody's keeping time. See, there's keeping time and then there's doing time. In English, they mean 2 different things. You don't want to be doing time. The breath is an important tool, and counting the breath is an important technique to stabilize the mind. When the mind is somewhat stable and you can maintain your connection with the breath without mechanically counting, then you kind of can let the counting fade. When you notice that you're starting to get real distracted, it's time to bring that tool back. Like any time that you have a tool, you always have it in your toolbox, and then, I need this now. So it's not an end in itself. It's a tool to help the mind be stable and to increase the power of concentration. So it's a concentration builder. That's what it is. If you're using it to keep time, then maybe just a clock or watch is better, right? But if you're using it to stabilize and to increase your concentration so that you can stay 5 minutes without floating all over the place, that's good. Yeah, be careful of any type of attachment we can have to any tool like this, because then you're walking around holding this tool when perhaps you should put it in the drawer. So I would experiment a bit with letting go counting, and then when you find you're a bit unsettled, using it, the word is gingerly, using it gingerly, like lightly, like not, with moderation. Yes. The other thing I want to mention about expression, which came to mind, is that in a lot of the traditional Zen stories, there is a leaving behind words because of that deep awareness they have of how words can set a trap. They can trap us. They can confine us. They can keep us boxed in, thinking that the word is the thing. So sometimes when someone's asked a question in some of these stories, the answer is like, sometimes it's a hit or a slap, or it's just like a point, or, or it's a flower or something like that. But they're trying to break past our strong dependency on words, which is ironic. I'm teaching about it using words, but, there are many teachers throughout history in this tradition that didn't teach using words. So in the same way that we can express the great matter of life and death without words, we can also express our compassion and care, definitely, without words.